Hi, I'm Ed Pascarosa. I live in Acton. I'm here with my cousin Tom Hayes, and he has had a very interesting life, and we thought we might share it with you all.
Ed, this is a joy. You know, all my life I've wanted to be in a television studio. We had to come to Acton, Massachusetts, the television capital of the world.
True.
As Johnny Carson used to say, lovely downtown Burbank, California. Well, really seriously, thanks. I think there's a great opportunity. You and I have been talking a lot lately about getting some time and, you know, just going over some of the things I do, some of the projects I'm in, where I've been. And, you know, I think I've got an interesting story to share. Ed and I have an amazing background in the family that we grew up with, and the great Italian background, which I think made us rise to the occasion to become great storytellers, all of those stories around those great dinners where there was lasagna and there was braciole and there was salads and antipastos. But you're right, I grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, when Ed grew up in the next town. And at the age of 13, well, I always like to start off with this. This usually is a good attention together. Let me kind of do that, you know, forget the sandal, it's summertime. But at the age of 13, I lost my leg, as you know, had osteosarcoma, which at the time there was no chemotherapy and only 5% of the kids survived. And I'm one of those lucky kids. And so obviously that kind of sets me apart. And I learned a lot of things right from the shot. And one of the first things I learned was I had just received a brand new bicycle. I don't know if it was some kind of weird trick that my parents wanted to play on a kid who was about to have his leg amputated. But nobody in Roxbury in those days got a brand new bicycle. And if you did have it, it didn't last too long because somebody stole it. But I remember the doctor, I think that, you know, if people ask me where did my life begin, it began at the moment when I was in the hospital. I had been there for a month, and I just kept hearing all these stories about and all these tests that got more and more involved. And I remember they did, actually I did a bone marrow transplant because they wanted to see if, at the time I didn't know this because nobody was cluing me in, if I was going to live or not. And I remember my mother saying, oh my God, he's going to live, he's going to live. And I'm like, you know, what are they talking about? So one day, a bunch of doctors, and there was more than the usual, and a nurse walked in. A lot of nurses, and a lot of residents, and I guess this, you know, I was going to be the test case for how they were going to create some bedside manner. And you know, so I just had a sense that something's up today. It's not normal. And my parents came in and they said to me, doctor says, Tom, we've got some news for you. You're going to lose your leg. And I remember just laughing. It was a pretty good joke. And I looked around the room and nobody else was laughing. And I said, it was, again, from a 13-year-old's perspective, and I always talk about this when I do my lectures. From a 13-year-old's perspective, I started to bargain. I mean, here's this doctor. And I said, well, how long will you give me if you don't remove my leg? And he said, well, I said 30 years. Now, you have to imagine, to a 13-year-old, 30 years is like, you know, I was looking at all those 43-year-olds going, who wants to live now? I mean, these guys, they got bills, they got to go to work. You know, the relationships don't look too good. Nobody seems really happy to be gone. And he said, no, you won't even have 30. So I dropped the decade. I said, how about 20? Mm-hmm. Now, you know, it's getting, because the 33-year-olds looked like they were doing all right. You know, they still had a lot of vitality. They were moving along. He says, no, I won't give you 20 years. I dropped to 10. And now that I think of it, I mean, here I am at 13 looking out and bargaining for 10 years. And if I had made the deal, I would have been really upset right now because, you know, we're in our 60s and we got a lot of living left to do. And finally I said, we got down to 2, and he said, can you give me 2? Well, once we got through that part, my immediate question is, well, what will I be able to do? Will I be able to walk? He said, yeah, you'll be able to walk. Well, run. I was a very fast runner, very athletic. And he said, no, that won't happen. So then immediately I went to the bicycle. And I said, what about the bike? And he said, impossible, impossible. And I remember thinking, you know, wow. So but I had this amazing desire. So I think at the age of 13, I learned, you know, one of the reasons I like to talk about success and motivation is that I learned at 13 that I didn't have to listen to this guy, you know. So an amazing drama developed afterwards. We went to, I would sit on the corner, as we all did in those days, listening to the 50s music. And one day, my brother came around the corner with my bicycle. And I said, you know, that's my bicycle. So he got off, and I went over and I grabbed the bicycle. Well, I had two things working for me. I had the desire and I had the fear. And so when I got on the bicycle, immediately, those were the days that parents were home, and at least the mothers were home. And as soon as I grabbed the handlebars, sat on the thing, all the kids split and went and got their parents, their mothers. And in seconds, there was 10 mothers grabbing my hands from the bicycle. And and it got to be great. Immediately as a kid, I'm thinking, on the one hand, I want to do this, but thank God they showed up, because I don't have to prove it. And because what the doctor was worried about, because I lost my leg at the hip, if I tipped this way, it would have been over. I would have just fallen straight down and probably killed myself. So this drama went on all summer. I'd grab the bicycle, the mothers would come out, they grab, and it was great. I had all this attention, you know, and you know, here's the kid, he's gonna you know, climb this mountain, and they're pulling him back, you can't climb the mountain, and I didn't have to prove it, but I'm still a hero. All of a sudden, one day in August, I jumped on the bike, and it's one of, you know, and we just went through in August, and when August happens, things, you just know, it's a change of the seasons, you know, everybody's thinking about back to school. It was a quiet afternoon. I grabbed the bicycle, and when I grabbed it, everybody ran, but nobody came. And so now I have to deal with, the only one to deal with is me. I don't have a show. And that's the first time I became cognizant that, and I talk to people a lot about this now, that we have a voice. You know, and without fail, everybody I talk to, nobody wants to talk about the voice. In fact, I saw a great T-shirt yesterday. You're just jealous because you don't hear the voices. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not, because I do hear the voices. And the voice says, ride the bike. And I just remember it was, you know, just like, where'd that come from, you know? But it was such a reassuring, confident, do it, that I kicked off the curb, and immediately the thing that I was most worried about, I had my balance. And thank God it was a 3-speed in those days, so you could reach down. I grabbed the pedal with my foot, pulled it up, pushed, and I'm off. And now I've got not only a little bounce, I got centrifugal force. So I do this a couple of times. And now it was a scene out of Forrest Gump. The mothers are running out of the houses down the street, and they're street going, and I'm good 20, 30 yards ahead of them, and waving. And I remember looking back, and they all just, it was truly out of a scene out of a movie. They all just stopped, realizing they couldn't catch me. And I think the shock to everybody, especially myself, was they just witnessed the impossible being done, and they saw that it was miraculous. So my father comes home that night, he puts a stirrup on the bicycle, and it was enough to enable me to be, you know, I wrote this thing once about, after seeing The Terminator, about the relationship, and a lot of movies deal with this now, relationship between men and machine. And, you know, we forget that the bicycle is a machine, but that machine enabled me to equal the playing field. So there I was. I was on, now, and because I had the athletic ability, it wasn't long before I was as fast as the kids, and then faster, which really ticked them all off, because here's this one-legged bicycle rider beating them. So I think, you know, there's a reason, everything happens for a reason, and one of the things that I think that I'm so passionate about, no matter what obstacle comes along, no matter what the adversity is, there's always an answer. And I think that's helped me in a lot of ways, and it's also maybe upset a lot of people, because I really don't wait very long. If somebody puts up an obstacle, I'm immediately thinking, we go over, we go under, we go around, but we'll get around this thing. And so And I know I'm monopolizing here, but I want to use the flow of thoughts. You know, I talk about this little voice, and recently, as you know, we worked together on the new property we have, which is a transmedia children's property based originally on the idea of a bean coming from Boston, Beantown, and now we've extrapolated that to where we have a whole town. The property's called Beantown Pals, and so we manufacture toys, and we have stories, and we have now Rick Siegelco, who created Thomas the Tank, working for us, and the TV producer, and so we're ready to go to TV production, etc. So I get the chance to get one-on-one with kids, and right now I do a lot of, there's a program in Boston called If They Can Do It, So Can I, and it's, we talk to fifth graders. And I remember I always tell a story, and they're fascinated with this guy who comes in with this artificial leg, and you know, I do a little magic for the kids, and I tell the story. So I got through one day, and I was at a great school in the inner city called the Epiphany School, run by the Lutheran Church, and I asked the kids, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, have any of you ever had to, I had to teach myself how to ride the bicycle. Nobody, in those days, it was impossible to do what I did. Did you ever have to teach yourself something? And a little black girl stands up and she said, yeah. She says, I had to teach myself how to walk. And I looked at the kid and I said, wow. I said, congratulations. I said, so you were sick, or you had an accident, you learned how to walk? She goes, now here was a teacher standing beside me who had the kid for 9 months. I just met this little girl. And she said, no, man. She goes, the first time. And, you know, we're sitting there and I'm like, you know, I'm supposed to be teaching something, and I'm learning something really profound from this kid, and the teacher's looking at me. And I just wasn't like, and this kid had it all figured out, that what we forget every single day, that we have something making the blood pump, something digesting the food, there are no classes for, okay, Junior, it's time to learn how to walk. Mommy's going to show you. You put one foot here, you put the kid gets up and walks, the kid eats, the kid digests. And so we have this amazing innate intelligence like that voice. So I relate it to the voice. And so the second time, I was in the Hyde Park at a great public school, and the kids were just great, and they were animated. And so I used the same question, but I used it differently. I said, so I heard a voice that day explain, tell me how to get on the bicycle. I said, do any of you ever hear a voice? And then unanimously, these kids jump up and go, yes, yes, we hear the voice. We hear the voice all the time. And I said, see, and I said, the voice tells you the right thing to do. And they all scream universally, no, no, it tells us the wrong thing to do. And you know, and it hit me immediately. I said, yeah, that's the ego talking. That's that part of us that wants to think for ourselves. And I said, you're right. I said, that's the first voice, isn't it? And I said, now let me ask you, do you ever hear a voice after you hear the first voice? Yes, unanimously. We hear another voice. I said, and what does that voice tell you to do? He says, and they're screaming, that tells us the right thing to do. Now, 10-year-old kids getting this. And so I asked the question, and it was really funny because this word is verboten in schools, public schools today. So I asked, and not knowing anything of what I was going to get for an answer, I said, what's that voice? And this little 13-year-old black boy stands up and he says, man, he goes, that voice is God. And the entire class goes crazy. He's right. He's right. So I think, you know, it's amazing that we have this guiding principle inside that, like the day I heard that, you know, you ride the bike, and these kids are hip to that kind of thing. So that's the reason I feel like I got a story to tell, and I think I was telling somebody the other day that I'm so impassioned about it when I see people give up, when I see people throw in the towel and waste this precious gift. You know, it really drives me crazy. I think, you know, as you know, like we were talking about, I speak to a lot of cancer groups. And
so tell us, you're you're in many other professions. Why don't you list those, and then you can go back
Oh, okay.
and
Well,
repeat.
it was ironic that I spent so much time in the hospital as a kid and made friends, especially in those days, because of no chemo. The only therapy they had was radiation, and I ended up in actual selling radiology film. So I spent almost 27 years as a sales executive in the corporate world, picking up that management experience, but also, interestingly enough, because it's kind of fun to talk about this, because Ed and I both came from a family that were magicians. You know, we heard stories. You were alive when, but you don't remember our grandfather, right? Or do you actually remember?
No, I do not.
But the legend is that he was a prankster, practical joker, always in a joke shop. And Frank, I don't know if Frank is the oldest.
Yeah.
Well, Frank taught both of us how to do magic, and
Right.
you taught me how to do magic. And but without a support group or some place to do it, in those days we didn't have, you know, there weren't a lot of birthday parties in Roxbury to go do magic shows, and all the other kids hated you because you did it. They wanted to catch you rather than applaud you. I lost it, but making a sales call one day, my boss took out a very simple, the old disappearing nickels with the little cylinders,
Yeah.
and we ended up selling an account worth millions of dollars over a 10-year span, and it was immediately enough to get me back into doing magic. So along with the sales, I picked up magic, and before you know, one thing led to another, and the next thing I know, the doctors are having me perform for their kids, and so I was pushed, and the next thing you know, I'm doing fraternal organizations, and I joined, went out to California. We visited Frank, and Frank taught me even more firsthand. He was the president of the Pacific Coast Association of Magicians, and I got pretty good, and had an event for comedy, and you know, we can talk a little bit about the importance of, throughout all of this, without the humor, I don't think I could have kept going. You know, you just, I had to adapt a sense of humor about my situation. But, so I learned magic, and one day I had an affinity for comedy magic, and cable had just come out, and I'm watching cable TV, and Showtime Cable was looking for a contest, the funniest person in America, and it's ironic, it was the first time they did it, and they gave trophies for each state. And then there was this national runoff. And I remember just having a videotape of somebody doing one of my shows. I threw it in the mail and never thought anything. Well, they went through a whole year of going to comedy clubs. They made it a big promotion. They came to Boston and they auditioned all the greats, the Stephen Wrights, the Dennis Learys, and I figured, I'm done. And I got a phone call one day from Showtime Cable telling me that I won. And I remember saying, no, you got the wrong number, you know, at the time I wasn't even performing in comedy clubs. And I said, no, you won. And I doubted the lady so much, give me the number. So I called back, and it was true. And so without even, you know, going through all the hoops, you know, again, there's somehow, there is a plan for us along the way. I ended up in the comedy clubs. I got in through the side door. I didn't have to go through all auditions. So in addition to the management stuff, I had the magic and then the comedy. And so the transition to speaking was pretty darn simple. You know,
So you were also a corporate speaker.
Corporate speaker, because obviously I was picking up management techniques. In fact, I just wrote a blog about, and this is a serendipity that Ed and I are doing this. My greatest management lesson forever came from Ed, and I told you about this the other day. I would go to Ed's house in my 20s, and he lived in Brookline, and I would come over, and Ed would have a new stray dog every time I went. I'd come on every 6 months, and I'd say, what happened to the last dog? Oh, he got hit by a car, or he ran away again. And when I'd come to the house, there would be a new dog doing new tricks. And I'd go, after a couple of visits, it just blew my mind. I said, Ed, how do you teach all these dogs all these different tricks? And your answer was?
I don't teach them tricks. When they roll over, I say roll over. Some of them stand up, I say stand up. So whatever the characteristics of the dog, you put a word to it, and those are the tricks.
Right. And that stuck. and it stuck through me all through management because I had one of four executives that regional managers. There were four of us that I had the whole Northeast quadrant from Boston down to Washington over to Ohio, and I was responsible for over 50 million in sales and 27 people. And that was the management principle I used. I watched what people were good at and what they liked, because usually if they liked it, they were good at it, and I had them do that stuff. And I was able to take a component, I thought, in terms of a team as opposed to individuals. I never wanted people in the organization to, I thought it was crazy to make your own people compete against each other. It's like you've got enough competition on the outside. So I learned that management principle stayed with me even to this day. Even now with this new corporation, I just watch people and what they gravitate to, like the dogs. The dog rolls over, roll over. You know, you like to work with numbers, work with numbers. You know, you like to sell, sell. And when you come from that principle, so yeah, it wasn't difficult, especially with my ability to overcome hurdles at an early age. At 13, I had to learn, and that's one of the things I tell people about adversity is that, and I also relate it to cancer. I tell people, you know, cancer is a curse, but obviously it's also a blessing in the sense that it's the wake-up call. It's the wake-up call that get living, you know, how are you going to deal with this? How are you going to overcome this obstacle? And so those adversities, and I tell people there's an advantage to being what people call disabled. One of our cousins in California, Frank's kid, says she likes to call it differently abled, is that now if you make the decision to get back in the game, if you make the decision to get on par with everybody else, with the abled, you have to learn the principles of success. You have to learn all of those steps of setting a goal, having the desire, having the perseverance, not quitting, staying with it, and then once you get back on par, I mean, but now you're way ahead because what people are doing normal every single day, automatically, not even thinking about it, you now are up here. Because now, any dream or anything that you want, you start using those principles. So to learn this at 13 was, you know, a major turning point. And so when people said something couldn't be done, I was like, what are you talking about? I heard the word impossible. And so you're right. So it was a natural outflow from the magic, from being in front of audience, from doing the comedy, making people laugh, and then picking up the management and corporate skills to go into a company and, you know, talk about a myriad of things.
Right. Tell us what you talk about. If someone says, like, we want Tom Hayes for a corporate speaker, what topics do you tell them you can do?
Well,
how do you do it?
One of the things, obviously, because I was a leader and I was a good one, in fact, you know, I'm just absolutely blown away with the fact that after I left the corporate world, almost to a person, people have followed me and stayed in touch. And now when I started the new company, those people who I helped become successful, very successful, they all became millionaires, invested. And not only invested, came to work and followed me because I enabled. I made them, unlike a lot of other managers, I hired, you and I always talk about this, you hire people who are better than you. So what do I talk about? I talk about management. I talk about the fact that, you know, if you're fearful of somebody moving on behind you, you're done. Because
yeah, well, one of the advantages I think about you is you're a natural comedian. So in all of you're not a dry corporate speaker.
Yep.
You always put comedy in it.
Of course.
So that's what puts you, in my opinion, a cut
we use
of
stories.
everyone else.
And
you also do magic too. I mean, you do magic when you do comedy. I mean, right, when you do comedy, and you do magic when you do corporate speaking also.
If it's the point, and it emphasizes the point, and it breaks and keeps attention. Yeah, you use all of these skills, and obviously we use tons of comedy. You know, humor was important, so that's one of the other subjects I'll talk about. I'll talk about humor in the workplace and the importance of keeping things up. If you haven't got a team that's positive and flexible, I mean, humor keeps you flexible. I talk about leadership you know, and I tell your story. I tell my cousin has got the best management concept ever. You know, you can read the Druckers or all of the others. I said, but once you understand that simple principle. So leadership, I could talk about branding and marketing, which is a field that we had to take a character that had never existed before, and a toy and all of the other things, and brand this so that it became brand recognition and make us unique and different from. So branding, marketing, management, leadership, humor in the workplace, and also once in a while I get to have a lot of fun and blend it with when I become an imposter. I had heard about corporate imposters, and then I got to see a few of them, and that was right up my alley, because I'm a practical joker to begin with. And so what I'll do is come into a corporation, and I'll be introduced either as, my favorite character is the Irish economist, because I have a master's degree in economics. It's a natural for me, and so we always tell them that we pick the driest subject ever, that, you know, about the future of the world economy and its impact on security systems, whatever corporation I'm talking to.
So the president announces you as an expert.
I'm a visiting professor at Harvard. And I'm originally from Dublin, and I'm from the Trinity College, and I'm only here for a year. And you know, I show up, and I tell them I'm so happy to be here, you know, and it's great being in Boston. And you know, I talk about driving there and how crazy traffic is, and it's amazing when I don't adopt that character. When I get into him, you know, they forgive him for everything, you know, because he's likable. He's a likable chap, and the poor guy, he's from Ireland. He has no idea of what goes on here. So I insult people. I insult the corporation. I insult the customers, and people are dying. And I'm saying to myself, they'll let me get away with anything. And so I sometimes the original intent of it was doing that character for about 10 minutes, and then I would, you know, I'd pull the rug and I'd tell them who I really was. The problem with that was it was so so convincing as the Irishman, you know, and they got used to him, that I would say, all right, well, I'm not really an Irishman. I'm really a comedian, or I'm really.
We have 2 minutes to go.
2 minutes, all right. So what would happen was there would be just this silence.
Well, you told me about the times they carry you off.
Oh, yeah, well, we did a big thing for EMC Corporation, but it was a simulcast throughout the world. It was the biggest one I ever did, and I came on as a Harvard professor, and I went into this rant, and they actually came up. They got the biggest guy they could have, and they put me on his shoulders and carried me off, and I'm screaming, "You're lucky you've got your friends here." and I said, if your friends were here, I'd kick your butt. This monster's carrying me off, and I'm screaming, I'll be signing my books in the parking lot. And people, they told me for 2 weeks, people sent emails, irate emails of how rude they were to the Harvard professor. So yeah, well, this was great. Thank you for having me here.
Okay.
Great, let's do it again sometime.
As you can tell, Tom has many stories that he can tell, so this is the beginning of a series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
So you
went well.